To begin with the master review, we'll go over the vendor form within the accounts payable module. And then we will select any vendor. Within the vendor form, there is a FASTA for Bolivia localization fields. Here you will be able to see the fields tagged previously in the setup section. I'm talking about the person type, in this case the vendor being a society, the document type being needs, and its document number. Along these fields you will also find the fiscal regime type, which refers to the tax regime that applies to this vendor, the issuance type, that refers to the kind of issuing of fiscal invoices that apply to this vendor, and its authorization number and authorization date, as well as a checkmark to point out if this kind of operation applied to said vendor. As it is right now, these fields aren't mandatory for any of the masters that will be shown, but this is just because we are looking at a basic version of the localization in one of our environments. A change can be made to make them all mandatory in our client environments if requested. Next up, we will be looking at the customer master within the account receivable module, where as well we will be selecting one specific customer. In the customer master, we will find the same path tab specific for Bolivia localization field, as well as the same fields that we look at in the vendor master, minus the has invoices checkbox, because that no longer applies to account receivable operations. On an additional note, while the address fields within the masters aren't specific to the Bolivia localization, it will be most likely needed to be filled in order for the operation to be completed, at least the fields for city, state, country, street name, and postal code. Lastly, for the master, we will be looking at the bank accounts within the cash and bank management module. For bank accounts, we won't find a specific FASTA for the Bolivia localization fields. Instead, the fields will be located in the general FASTA. This is due to the fact that for the banks, the only fields that apply are the identification ones, like person type, document type, and document number. Now, with the setup and the masters out of the way, we'll go over how this setup and the master will play a part in the transactions within the system. For the showing of the transaction, we'll go about some basic transaction in the modules as an example. Before anything else, please keep in mind that in the process that I'm about to show you, some fields are going to be filled manually and won't be mandatory in the validation. But bear in mind to it, because this is due to the fact that for this demonstration video, we're working with a base version of the localization in one of our own environments. Customization and other changes can be made during the implementation design for the filling that works best for your company. First, we will go to the most basic operation for the accounts payable module, that is invoice journals. Now we will enter into this already created invoice in draft state. As you can see, it's a pretty normal invoice journal with invoice date, invoice number, amounts, and offset, and only has the vendor missing. If you see here in the upper part, you will see a tab specific for Bolivia. Here you will find all the specific fields for the Bolivia localization that will apply to this transaction. Now we will go back to the list tab and add a vendor. Now if we go back to the Bolivia tab, we will see that certain information was filled from the master of the vendor. Meanwhile, other fields should be filled manually by the user according to the needs of their transaction. For example, the invoice specification, you should select the exact value that belongs to this kind of invoice. The same thing applies to the DUI number, the control code, and the transaction type. We'll fill it right now, just as a way to complete the configuration, and we'll go back to the line. Now we will proceed to post this transaction. Now that the transaction was successfully posted, all the information filled in the Bolivia fields will go permanently into the transaction, and we'll go over to the different reports that we'll be looking at in the next section. To continue with the accounts payable transaction, we'll go over not invoice, but in this case, payments. So we'll go over to the vendor payment journal. The same way as before, we'll enter into this payment that has already been created. So, with this out of the way, we can proceed to post this payment. Just as it was the case with the invoice journal, the values field for Bolivia localization in this form will be registered into the payment and can be utilized for the localization reports. To finish up, we'll go over an account receivable transaction, in this case, free text invoices. In the case for free text invoice, you will be able to see that there isn't a devoted tab for Bolivia, but instead the fields are presented in the header of the invoice. Here we will be able to see information that is bring from the customer, like the identification type, the issuance type, and the authorization number. And just as with the invoice journal, there are independent fields that must be filled manually, like the invoice specification or invoice status. With this out of the way, we can proceed to post also this free text invoice. And with this, we finish our basic demonstration of how the Bolivia localization fields work within basic transactions in Dynamics 365. Next, we'll follow with a review of the localization reports.